no one. You can just change your mindset and you change your life.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset and you change your life.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. We're live here on Inspired Distraction. Today we're going to cover the Democratic debate. As you may or may not know, this week was quite an interesting one. Donald Trump somehow escaped impeachment and received the acquittal. Or, as he calls it, total acquittal. Bernie Sanders and Jeff Buttigieg are going at it. I'm sorry, Pete Buttigieg, not Jeff. They're really in a head-to-head battle, and the saga continues here live on Inspired Distraction as we cover the debate. Later on, we'll talk to you about some other stuff, but until then, let's get into it.
Out here tonight.
Through it all.
But listen, this is a state that Senator Sanders won.
In case you didn't know, Iowa is the Granite State. According to Real Clear Politics Average, Sanders tops New Hampshire polls at 26%, followed by former Vice President Joe Biden, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, 16%, and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren with 14%. Who will be on stage for the debate this evening, you may wonder? Well, everybody you saw last time. Okay, without further ado, if I may, I'm going to move us in with some live coverage here of the Democratic National Debate. How about some sound on that debate?
At least goes further than some on the stage with you are willing to go. You have called for the decriminalization of all drugs. Does that include heroin, meth, and cocaine, some of the drugs that have contributed to this crisis?
No, what I've called for is that incarceration should no longer be the response to drug possession.
With all due respect, Mayor Buttigieg, on your website it says that you called for decriminalization of all drugs.
Again, what I'm calling for is that we end the use of incarceration as a response. This does not mean that it will be lawful to produce or distribute those kinds of harmful drugs. But also, as we know from the opioid crisis,
sounds like he doesn't want to admit
companies that were acting irresponsibly with substances that were lawful. It's why in South Bend we sued those companies to hold them accountable. We've got to make sure that there is accountability for those who suppressed evidence about the addictiveness of those substances, even while we're also coming to recognize that these kinds of addiction are a medical issue, not a moral failure on the part of somebody battling that addiction. That's why medication-assisted treatment is so important. And those people who are being revived, and our own EMTs in my city have been so frustrated by the experience of reviving somebody, but then they have nowhere to go. Sometimes you get brought back with a dose of Narcan, but then your life depends on whether in the days that follow you make it until somebody can actually see you, because we have such a shortage of mental health and addiction providers in this country. We must act to change that and save lives when we do.
want to
That's
bring this
fair.
question now to
Something
Mr.
needs to
Yang.
change, right?
You've said you would decriminalize opioids, but you've also said that you would require all overdose patients to go to mandatory treatment centers for 3 days. Well, right now in New Hampshire, there aren't enough beds in treatment centers and across the country. How would you make sure treatment is available for all overdose patients? And what would you do to fill the gap in the meantime?
That's what we have to change, Monica. I've heard heartbreaking stories from families here in New Hampshire that have been destroyed, torn apart by the opiate epidemic. And you have to look at the companies that profited to the tune of tens of billions of dollars in profits of essentially blood money. As president, we will take back those profits and put them to work right here in New Hampshire so that if you are seeking treatment, you have resources to be able to pursue it. This is not a money problem fundamentally, this is a human problem, but money cannot be the obstacle. This is something that happened on the government's watch. The government allowed this opiate epidemic to spread throughout our communities, and we have to do everything in our power to actually make sure that if you're seeking treatment, you know you're not going to be sent to jail. We have safe injection and safe consumption sites for you. If you have a family member who's struggling, you can refer them and know that they're not going to have criminal penalties as a result. There is so much about this that's endemic to what's happened throughout the country in terms of companies running amok, this hyper-corporate capitalism where if money's on one side in this country and people are on the other side, the money is winning. You can see it with the opiate epidemic. You can see it with the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel companies. This is what we must change, and that's where I'll lead as president.
Senator Klobuchar, I want to take the question to you now. As a prosecutor, you embrace tough-on-crime policies, even with drug offenders. You've also spoken many times about your father's own addiction issues, his own alcoholism, and his DUI arrests. If addiction is a disease, should people be arrested for it? And as a prosecutor, do you regret sending people with substance abuse issues to jail?
I led one of the most successful drug courts in the country in Hennepin County. And I always would say and believed, and I think my record shows this, that we weren't a business. We didn't want to see repeat customers. And if you don't want to see repeat customers, the only answer is treatment.
Rehabilitation?
And maybe you're referring to some of the
Maybe,
people
possibly.
who are dealing big time in drugs. Yes, I felt that we should prosecute those people. But when it comes to, and you asked Mr. Yang a question, and I think we owe it to the people of New Hampshire to have had one of the biggest addiction rates in the country and death rates when it comes to opioids, to explain how we will pay for the treatment and the beds. I've been very clear about this. There's going to be a major settlement coming through, a federal settlement against all these opioid manufacturers. The evidence is overwhelming, including an email where one guy, a business guy, says to the other, they're eating them like Doritos. Just keep pumping them out. We will get a conservative estimate, $40 billion in from that settlement. We can put a 2 cents per milligram tax on opioids that brings in another $40 billion. Then you can close the hedge fund loophole. That brings in $18 billion. And just like every other policy I've proposed, and I think New Hampshire voters should care about this, I have showed how I'm going to pay for it, because I think we have someone in the White House that has told over 15,000 lies. He makes all kinds of promises. The people of New Hampshire and the people of our country deserve better. I will get this done, and it is personal for me.
Good evening, candidates. New Hampshire is a battleground not just for presidential contenders, but also for top issues, and that includes gun policy. Senator Sanders, for many voters in this Democratic primary, your allure is about consistency. When it comes to progressive issues, you've been on the right side of them for a long time. One exception is gun rights. In the 90s, when you were in Congress, you voted against background checks, and you also voted against a waiting period for purchase of a firearm. Can you explain why you oppose these things that you now support?
I can, Adam, and let me also say that in 1988, I probably lost a race for Congress, and we only have one congressperson in the whole state. Because in 1988, I said that we should ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. That was 30 years ago. Furthermore, I am very proud that today I have a D- voting record from the NRA. And under my administration, it will be the American people doing gun policy, not dictated by the NRA. But to answer your question, I come, like New Hampshire, from a very, very rural state. In Vermont, until last 2 years ago. We had virtually no gun control legislation at all, and I represented that perspective. The world has changed. In Vermont and in New Hampshire and all over this country, people are sickened by the mass shootings that we have seen and the gun violence that we have seen. The world has changed and my views have changed. And my view is right now, we need universal background checks. We end the gun show loophole. We end the so-called straw man provision. We make certain that we end the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. And we go further. We go further, but the bottom line is I will not be intimidated by the NRA. We're going to run the gun policy that the American people want.
Vice President Biden, you've taken a lot of heat in this primary on these debate stages and from voters here in New Hampshire for your past positions. You've essentially asked them to look at the totality of your record and give you the benefit of the doubt. Does Senator Sanders deserve that same benefit of the doubt on guns?
Well, look, here's the deal. The biggest mistake that Bernie made, that Senator Sanders made, he voted to give the gun manufacturers, the only major industry in America, a loophole that does not allow them to be sued for the carnage they are creating. First thing I'll do as president is work to get rid of that. It's going to be hard. Think of all the thousands and thousands of people who died. And I might add, Bernie, while you were representing your constituency, an awful lot of people that are a gun state, and they've come around. In fact, all those folks in California, New York, Pennsylvania, they were getting killed by the thousands during this same period. I come from a state that's a major gun-owning state. I introduced the first assault weapons ban. I, in fact, got it passed. I'm the only guy that beat the NRA twice. While I was pushing the Brady background bill, background checks, Bernie voted 5 times against it when he was in the House. So look, the other thing is that when we have to be held accountable for the things we did. I'm the guy that set up drug courts. I set them up. I wrote it into law, and it never got funded. And also on opioids, I'm the guy who's already begun to make a down payment. In the Cures Act, I put in $1 billion to fight opioid addiction. And lastly, my time is going to be up shortly. Here's the deal. Those chief executive officers of those drug companies, they should not only be fined, they should go to jail.
Senator Warren, we'd like to go to you now.
Yeah.
Plans count for a lot. I want to ask you this question here, though. Laws can do so much. If you could change one thing about America's gun culture, what would it be?
Look, we have a gun violence problem in America. It is about the mass shootings that we hear about in our schools and that frighten us, about in theaters and in churches. It's also, though, about shootings that occur on sidewalks and in playgrounds, often in communities of color that are hit hardest. But there are no headlines over those. It's also about suicide and the increased lethality of suicide because of the availability of guns. It is also about the increased chances that it's usually a woman will die of domestic violence if she is with a violent man and a gun is in the home. We need to think of this problem not as one and done or 3 things and done. We need to think of it just like we did on auto safety. We just keep coming back. We treat it like the public health emergency that it is. But the question we should be asking ourselves is when America across this country, including gun owners, agree in certain basic things, universal background checks, get assault weapons off the streets, why can we not even get a vote in the United States Senate? And the answer is 90%. Think about this. More than 90% of Americans agree on this. We can't get a vote in the United States Senate because it is the gun industry that continues to call the shots. Until we attack the corruption in Washington, the influence of money on campaigns and lobbying, we're not going to be able to meet our promises. And one more, until we agree that we are willing to roll back the filibuster, the gun industry is going to continue to have a veto, and we will never make the changes we make. We have to be willing to build a future that works not for a gun industry, but that works for the rest of America and protects our children.
You've got to be able to sue the gun industry.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to go back to David up there at the Home Office.
Adam, Monica, thank you, and thanks to WMUR tonight. I want to turn to the Supreme Court, the balance on the court, and the issues before the court right now. President Trump, in just the last 24 hours, saying we've appointed 191 federal judges, 2 Supreme Court justices, keeping his campaign promise to shift the court to the right.
All right, that guy's a real butt kisser if I've ever heard one. That'll be all. Like I said, that'll be all.
Did not come with an agenda. And you've said before, we both believe that we should not apply narrow litmus tests to appointees to the Supreme Court.
But
let me just ask, would you do it differently as president, Mr. Vice President? Would there be a litmus test on abortion?
If you say the rest of what I said that we're going to not appoint anyone who did not have a view that unenumerated rights existed in the Constitution. That's not a specific test. It's a generic test. And the only reason women have the right to choose is because it's determined that there's unenumerated rights coming from the 9th Amendment in the Constitution. That's what I said. And I was part of the reason why Elena Kagan, who worked for me, got on the Supreme Court. I was part of the reason why Ruth Bader Ginsburg is on the court. I was part of the reason why Sotomayor is on the court, and she swore me in. I presided, and I'm the reason why this right wasn't taken away a long time ago, because I almost single-handedly made sure that Robert Bork did not get on the court because he did not think there should be enumerated rights. Unenumerated.
So let me just drill down.
Let's get that straight.
Mr. Vice President, I am aware of what you said, which is why I'm asking, would you do it differently now? Would there be a litmus test on abortion?
Yes, look, here's the deal. The litmus test on abortion relates to a fundamental value in the Constitution. A woman does have a right to choose. I would, in fact, if they rule it to be unconstitutional, I will send to the United States Congress, and it will pass, I believe, a bill that legislates Roe v. Wade adjusted by Casey. It's a woman's right to do that, period. And if you call that a litmus test, it's a litmus test. But what I was talking about in the past, so no one gets confused here, is if you read the Constitution very, very narrowly and say there are no unenumerated rights, if it doesn't say it in the Constitution, it doesn't exist. You cannot have.
I've got to say, he's hot tonight.
At the time, and as Vice President, as a member of society.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Senator Warren?
Look, I've lived in an America in which abortion was illegal, and rich women still got abortions. And that's what we have to remember about this. States are heading toward trying to ban abortion outright, and the Supreme Court seems headed in exactly that direction as well. If we are going to protect the people of the United States of America, and we are going to protect our rights to have dominion over our own bodies, then it's going to mean we can't simply rely on the courts. 3 out of every 4 people in America believe right now that the rule of Roe versus Wade should be the law. That means we should be pushing for a congressional solution as well. It is time to have a national law to protect the right of a woman's choice.
Senator Warren, thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Interesting reaction.
Should there be a litmus test? It's an active call here tonight. I did want to come to you on this question as well.
Thank you.
Should there be a litmus test on abortion?
I would only appoint judges that would respect precedent, and one of those key precedents is Roe v. Wade. In addition, you have got to put it into law. Donald Trump, and I think it's really important to take it to him here, when he was running for election, and this is a case I will make on the debate stage against him, he actually said that he wanted to put women in jail. He then dialed it back and said, no, I want to put doctors in jail. Is it a big surprise then we're seeing states like Alabama start enacting laws that would criminalize doctors who perform abortions? It's not. And that is why it's going to be really important when you look at the overwhelming public support for funding Planned Parenthood, for making sure women have access to contraceptions, to making sure that they have a right to choose, that we make this case strongly and loudly.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. Mayor Buttigieg, you have signaled that you'd be open to the idea of expanding the court. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had suggested leaving the court as it is, saying, quote, 9 seems to be a good number. And in fact, she said if the number of justices is increased, quote, it would make the court appear partisan. It would be one side saying, when we're in power, we're going to enlarge the number of judges to have more people who will vote the way we want them to. Is Justice Ginsburg wrong?
Well, if all we did was change the number number of justices, then I agree with her that that could be the consequence. What I've called for is not only reforming the number of justices on the bench, but structural reform so that some of the justices are not appointed through a partisan process. We cannot allow the Supreme Court to continue to become one more political battlefield as we are seeing today. And the time has come for us to think bigger, not just reforming the makeup of the court, as America, by the way, has done several times in our history, but also remember that the founders gave us the power to amend the Constitution for a reason, and we shouldn't be afraid to use it. It's not something you do lightly or quickly, but when it comes to something like Citizens United, which holds that corporations have the same political soul as people, and that spending money to influence an election is the same thing as writing an op-ed to your local paper, we need a constitutional amendment to clear that up and protect our democracy.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. Vice President Biden, I do want to come to you on this. President Trump has said that the only reason Democrats want to expand the court is they want to try and catch up. You have called any expansion of the court a bad idea, adding, "We will live to rue that day." Do you agree with President Trump on that?
I agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's who I agree with. And I agree the way to deal with Citizens United is pass a constitutional amendment I introduced 25 years ago, saying that only public money can be spent in elections, period. Not private money, not billionaires, not money from special interests, period. That's the way to amend the Constitution and deal with that. In addition to that, if in fact, look, the Democrats stood up against a man I revere, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He wanted to expand the court, but they were wise enough to understand that whoever then is the majority will have the ability to abuse it, and it will lose its legitimacy. And there are three equal branches of government. It says the president shall nominate, the Senate shall dispose. The Senate shall make that decision, not the president. He can nominate. That's why it's so important. We must win back the United States Senate this time out. And that's why, as you all look at it up here in New Hampshire and around the world, around the country, you have to ask yourself, who is most likely to help get a senator elected in North Carolina, Georgia? Who can win Florida, Pennsylvania, Minnesota? Who can do that? Because you've got to be able to win those. Well, you can. I agree. But here's the point. You've got to be able to. You've got to be able to not just win, you've got to bring along a United States Senate, or this becomes moot.
Okay.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you.
Got to admit, Biden looks hot tonight, looking good. Even though he confused country and world, that's all right.
There is. I will never nominate any person to the Supreme Court or the federal courts in general who is not 100% pro Roe v. Wade. Number two, we have got to codify Roe v. Wade into legislation. Number three, we have to significantly expand funding for Planned Parenthood.
Mr. Steyer, I want to bring you in on this because you have claimed that when it comes to the Supreme Court, you have said Republicans have been cheating.
Sure, they've been cheating. Look, what we saw Mitch McConnell do, not just in the Supreme Court with
Bernie looking good as well, I must admit. That's all I've got. Let's listen to Bloomberg, Mr. Commercial Man, give his thoughts on this whole thing.
exactly the same way about a woman's right to choose. Everybody on this row feels exactly the same way on gun control. Every single one in this row feels the same way. There's something else going on. These Republicans are in control. They're stacking the court for a generation with young right-wing radicals. And we've watched it happen, and the question is, what are we going to do about it? That's where we are in the United States. And the question is, actually, Joe Biden's right. We have to go win a huge victory this year. And we're in trouble. And so the question is going to be, look at these people. Who can pull together the Democratic Party? And let me say this. We have not said one word tonight about race. Not one word. Are you kidding me? We have the most diverse party. We have a very diverse country. We have a very diverse party. The heart and soul of this party is diversity. Black people, Latinos, AAPI people, Native Americans, and white people. But for goodness sakes, pull it together. We're talking about something different.
This is true.
The question we have is, how are we getting that diverse group of people?
All those white-ass people up there, and they forgot. Yeah. There's bigger issues than just white people issues.
How do we beat Trump? How do we take down these Republicans? And the answer is, we've got to show we can take them down on growth, job creation, the economy. We send them packing, and then we get all of this, including beating the corporation.
Mr. Steyer, thank you. The night is still young. Many questions to come, and Lindsay Davis is next.
Sorry for that
Turn now
advertisement.
to criminal justice. Mayor Buttigieg, under your leadership as mayor, a black resident in South Bend, Indiana, was 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white resident. Now, that racial disparity is higher than the rest of the state. In fact, it's higher than the rest of the nation, and that disparity increased in South Bend after you took office. When talking about the problem on national terms, you have called it, quote, evidence of systemic racism. But you were mayor for 8 years, so weren't you, in effect, the head of the system? And how do you explain that increase in black arrests under your leadership?
Well, the reality is, on my watch, drug arrests in South Bend were lower than the national average, and specifically to marijuana, lower than in Indiana. But there is no question that systemic racism has penetrated to every level of our system, and my city was not immune. I took a lot of heat for discussing systemic racism with my own police department, but we've got to confront the fact that there is no escaping how this is part of all of our policies. Earlier, we were talking about opioids, and
I love that he blames the system for his jurisdiction's problems. How convenient, Mr. Pete.
a lot of people, including a lot of African-American activists in my community, who have made the very good point. It's great that everybody's so enlightened about drug policy now when it comes to opioids, but where were you when it came to marijuana? Where were you when it came to the crack epidemic in the 1990s? That is one of the reasons why I am calling for us as a country to take up those reforms that end incarceration as a response to possession and make sure that we legalize marijuana, and when we do it retroactively with expungements to correct the harm done in so many cases of incarceration, disproportionately of black and brown Americans, where the incarceration did far more harm than the offense it was intended to deal with.
Right. Let me go back to the original question, though. How do you explain the increase in black arrests in South Bend under your leadership for marijuana possession?
And again, the overall rate was lower.
No, there was an increase. The year before you were in office, it was lower. Once you became in office in 2012, that number went up. In 2018, the last year that we have a record for, that number was still up.
Yep. And one of the strategies that our community adopted was to target when there were cases where there was gun violence and gang violence, which was...
How are you going to talk about your strategy when she just talked about the fact that it got worse?
Teenagers, disproportionately black teenagers.
Jeez.
We adopted a strategy that said that drug enforcement would be targeted in cases where there was a connection to the most violent group or gang connected to a murder. These things are all connected, but that's the point. So are all of the things that need to change in order for us to prevent violence and remove the effects of systemic racism, not just from criminal justice, but from our economy, from health, from housing, and from our democracy itself.
Senator Warren, is that a substantial answer from Mayor Buttigieg?
No.
Oh, thank you, Warren.
You have to own up to the facts. And it's important to own up to the facts about how race has totally permeated our criminal justice system. You know, for the exact same crime, study after study now shows that African Americans are more likely than whites to be detained, to be arrested, to be taken to trial, to be wrongfully convicted, and to receive harsher sentences. We need to rework our criminal justice system from the very front end on what we make illegal all the way through the system and how we help people come back into the community. But we cannot just say that criminal justice is the only time we want to talk about race specifically. We need to start having race-conscious laws. Housing, for example. I have a great housing plan to build more housing in America, but understand, it was the policy of the United States of America to discriminate against African Americans and people, any other people of color, for buying homes until 1965. You can't just repeal that and say, okay, now everything is even. It's not. We need race-conscious laws in education, in employment, in entrepreneurship to make this country a country of opportunity for everyone, no matter the color of their skin.
Elizabeth, with respect, with respect, you can't regulate away racism with a whole patchwork of laws that are race-specific. What we have to do is heed the writings of Martin Luther King, whose birthday we just celebrated. He said that capitalism forgets that life is social, and what he was championing was a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans of $1,000 a month or more that would end up reshaping our economy in communities of color, make it so that black net worth is not 10% of white net worth in this country, which is the most important number of them all. We can't regulate that away through any other means except by putting money directly into the hands of African Americans and Latinos and people of color to allow businesses to actually flourish and grow in those communities. The only way that will happen is if Black and Latino consumers have buying power, and that is where we have to move as a country.
Senator Sanders, then Mr. Steyer.
Andrew, no, let me say this.
It's about time Yang got in the game.
I am the person on this stage who will say
These other mother humpers need to just sit down and shut up and let Bernie and Yang talk.
I am for reparations to African Americans in this country, and anyone who thinks that racism is a thing of the past and not an ongoing problem is not dealing with reality. In fact, 3 days ago, one of the leaders of Joe Biden's South Carolina campaign made racist remarks about someone associated with our campaign. And the Legislative Black Caucus went out en masse to stand up for that man and for our campaign. Joe, I'm asking you to come with me and the Legislative Black Caucus and disavow Dick Harpootlian and what he had to say. It was wrong. And I'm asking you to join us, be on the right side.
I'm asking you to join me and join in the support I have from the overwhelming number of the members of that Black Caucus. I have more support in South Carolina in the Black Caucus and the Black community than anybody else. Double what you have or anybody else has.
But wait a second, Bernie.
Well, that is quite right.
Let's not argue about polls. This isn't about Bernie. This isn't about polls. This is not about polls.
Who's he calling Bernie, first off?
9 members of the Black Caucus in South Carolina supporting us. But more importantly, much of what Elizabeth said is absolutely correct. We have a racist society from top to bottom, impacting healthcare, housing, criminal justice, education, you name it. And clearly this is an issue that must be dealt with. But in terms of criminal justice, what we have got to do is understand the system is broken, is racist. We invest in our young people in jobs and education, not more jails and incarceration. We end the war on drugs, which has disproportionately impacted African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. We end private prisons and detention centers in America.
Bernie, I appreciate what you're saying.
And, excuse me, we also, most people
Excuse
don't
me.
notice, tonight in America, 200,000 people are in jail without having been convicted of anything.
That's right.
200,000 people because they can't afford the $500 for bail they need to get out of jail. That is outrageous. We're going to end cash bail.
Okay, let me say that.
End it now.
I've worked to end cash bail in California, and it's gone. I've worked to end private prisons in California, and they're gone. I'm somebody who's, our family, my wife and I started a bank specifically to support businesses owned by women, Black people, and Latinos because they couldn't get financing anywhere else. But Joe, I want to answer. Really,
How about
I think
that
you should
plaid
come over
tie?
and disavow the statements that this man made because, that were openly racist, that were wrong, and the Legislative Black Caucus is against. I'm asking you to join us and do the right thing.
I've already spoken to Dick Harpootlian, and he, in fact, is, I believe, sorry for what he said. But here's the deal, folks. Look.
Doesn't sound like he wants to disavow what Dick had to say about the caucus.
Here, for example, in South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, he has a program, it's 10, 15, 30. We should be investing our money in those communities that haven't gotten help for a long time and give most of that help to those communities. Make it a priority. We should make sure that we have no one going to jail for a drug offense. They go directly mandatory prison. I mean,
has he always had trouble speaking like this? If you're watching, if you're the one person watching and you actually keep up with Joe Biden, I'd love to know if he's always spoke like this or if this is something that's associated with his older age.
Sure that we have a window at the Treasury Department that'll defender. That's why I got involved. There's so many things we have to do across the board, and in education. At-risk schools. We should triple the funding we have for at-risk schools to provide for 4, 5, and 6 years old to be able to go, 3, 4, and 5 years old to go to school, not daycare. Increase the salaries of teachers. Encourage more blacks to get into teaching, especially black men, because the studies show when there's a black man in a community, in a school, it increases prospects significantly, and so on. There's a lot we can do. I've laid it all out as how to do it. Go to joebiden.com. You'll see the whole deal, including criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As you mentioned, South Carolina, 3 weeks from tomorrow, they'll go to the polls to vote. Black voters make up about 60% of the electorate.
I do apologize for the disconnection. We are having a little bit of transmission issues here in Calibre Lake Studios, but we're back and we're still live following the Democratic National Debate going on now, live on this podcast or news show.
Voters?
Well, I think what Senator Turner was talking about are some of the early actions of Vice President Biden. But no, Joe Biden is a friend of mine, and I'm not here to attack him. But what I would say is that what we need in terms of the African-American community is to understand that we have got to start investing big time in education, in healthcare. There is no excuse why white families in America have 10 times more wealth than black families. No excuse that disproportionately African Americans are in jail compared to whites. No excuse for black women dying in childbirth 3 times the rate that white women are doing as well.
Senator Klobuchar? You had raised your hand before.
Yes, I did, because I think in addition to the economic argument we're making here with the sad stories of a woman walking into a maternity room in New Orleans and saying her hands are swollen and walking out without her baby, and 30% of African-American kids living in poverty. We know that there are economic solutions here to invest in those communities, housing, childcare. But there's something else insidious going on that we haven't addressed, and that is the systematic racism when it comes to voting. That is moves across the country to limit people's right to vote. And that is why I have been leading on these bills to automatically register every kid to vote in this country when they turn 18. There is no reason that we can't do that across this country. To stop the gerrymandering by setting up independent commissions in every single state. And yes, to stop the voting purges. Because what is going on right now, in the words of one North Carolina court, is that they are discriminating with surgical precision against African American voters. And we are not going to be able to get these things done if we don't give people the right to vote.
Vice President Biden and then Senator Warren.
I beg your pardon?
I just wanted to give you a chance to respond.
Yes, I agree completely. There should be registration, automatic registration turning 18. You get a driver's license, whatever you do, you automatically are registered, number one. Number two, with regard to what we're going to see in South Carolina, we're all going to be there pretty soon. We'll see whether or not it works. The response to the letter that the person, I'm not saying Bernie wrote the letter, but the senator wrote the letter, was very brisk and significant with other African Americans in South Carolina taking issue with her. But look, Amy is right. The senator is correct. That is that we, in fact, there is systematic racism. And that's why our Justice Department works so hard to go after those. You know, realize there are 35 states in the United States of America that have come up with a total of 78 laws to restrict voting just in the last 5 years to try to keep African Americans from voting and brown. black and brown people from voting. And that will be an enormous priority in my administration, as it was in ours. It's just wrong, simply wrong.
Senator Warren.
You know, I'm glad to stand on this stage with my fellow Democrats who talk about how important the black community is, at least at election time. Year after year after year, election after election after election, Democrats go to people in the black community and say, boy, we really care about these issues. Racism is terrible. We all want to do something. And then somehow the problem just seems to keep getting worse. Well, I think it's time we have real concrete plans that are going to make a difference in people's lives. I proposed a 2-cent wealth tax. And let me tell you just one of the things we can do with a 2-cent wealth tax. We can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. And because African Americans have to borrow more money to go to college, borrow more money while they're in college and have a harder time paying it back when they get out, that one law is going to help close the black-white wealth gap for people with student loans by about 20 points. We aren't making a difference in America. We're saying to the rich folks, you keep your money, and the rest of us will talk about racism, but not really do anything. I think the time for that is over. I'm ready to get in this fight and really make a change.
George. Okay, thank you. Actually, let's keep this debate going. Go ahead, Mr. Steyer.
Look, out of narrative comes policy. And we're talking about a lot of policies that affect Americans broadly and disproportionately affect black Americans or brown Americans. But what I believe is we should set up a commission on race and deal with race explicitly. Because everyone's saying we can't have rules that are different for different people, but in fact we're here because we had rules that are different for different people. I would set up a formal commission on race on day one to retell the story of the last 400 years in America of systematic racism against African Americans, not just legal discrimination, injustice, and cruelty, but also the contribution that the African American community has made to America in building it and in leading the entire country from a moral standpoint for generations and centuries. Because I believe out of narrative comes policy. We need to repair damage that's been done officially, and pretending we're all the same is not accurate. We got here a certain way. Let's talk about Jim Crow. Let's talk about Martin Luther King. Let's talk about Barbara Lee, the congresswoman from Oakland, who's one of our great leaders, and then let's figure out how to repair the damage so we can move forward together.
Mr. Yang, take on that argument and also what he said about reparations.
The median African-American household net worth is projected to be 0 by 2053. Things are not getting better for people of color. If anything, they're getting worse because we're in the process of eliminating the most common jobs in our economy. It's something of an economic unnatural disaster, and who suffers most in a natural disaster? People of color, people with lower levels of capital and access to opportunity and education. And while I know we love to champion education here as Democrats, only 33% of Americans are going to attend college. Lower percentage of African Americans. There is no way we can prevent this tsunami from wiping out African American net worth unless we put straight cash into their hands sometime between now and 2053. And it's not just them. It is truck drivers, it is retail clerks, it is call center workers, it is accountants, it is bookkeepers. We are in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country.
Let's go back to this.
I don't think any billionaire ought to be able to do it, and I don't think people where your mouth is and say no to the PACs. Look,
damn.
I think the way we build a democracy.
She said say no to the PACs.
Billionaires reaching in their own pockets or people sucking up to billionaires. The way we build it going forward is we have a grassroots movement funded from the grassroots up. That's the way I'm running this campaign. If you think it's the right way to run a campaign, go to ElizabethWarren.com and pitch in $5 because understand this. Our democracy hangs in the balance. If we have to fund through billionaires, then we're just going to be in America. It's going to work better and better for billionaires and not for anyone else.
So I can't stand the big money in politics. And one of my major focuses is going to be on passing that constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. I didn't come from money. And I just simply think people don't look at the guy in the White House and say, can we get someone richer? I don't think they think that. They want to have someone that they can understand. And you know my background. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet.
Looks like we're losing a lot of feed here. Is it supposed to?
He can, to send my dad to
Yes, it is supposed to.
my family's trust. And you can't send, like Donald Trump got from his family, you can't fit $413 million in a coffee can. My mom grew up as and wanted to be a teacher in Wisconsin. She moved to Minnesota. She taught second grade until she was 70 years old.
Oh, wow.
And no, I am not a billionaire, but I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, the daughter of a teacher and a newspaperman, the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, someone who has passed over 100 bills as the lead Democrat in that gridlock in Washington, D.C. And that is because we live in a country of shared dreams. And that means no matter where you come from, you should be able to make. So please help me in my efforts at amyklobuchar.com.
Everybody's getting the fundraising pitches out here right now. Senator Sanders, I am coming to you, but Mayor Bloomberg is. Let me just put the question to you, because Mayor Bloomberg has taken on your argument. I got an answer
before the question. It's more.
He says we need evolution, not revolution.
I can hear that.
Mayor Bloomberg has said we need evolution, not revolution, taking you on directly.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing. There are millions of people who can desire.
Hello. Don't miss your chance to book an appointment now. Sharon Lester, photography. Book an appointment.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset and you change your life.
We're back here on Inspire Distraction, also known as Empire Distraction. We're covering the Democratic debate today. And if you may have noticed, in the previous intro, the letter N in distraction was cut off. That's right. That's how we do it here on Empire Distractions. Never a moment. Always something interesting going on. Speaking of interesting, let's head back to the live coverage of the debate now. Yeah. How about some volume on the live coverage of the debate?
Wrong thing the way Mr. Trump did with General Soleiman. We have to ask, does that help us build a coalition of countries around the world to do the right thing? It absolutely does not. Being all by ourselves, being the empire in the Star Wars movie, does not put us in a position to get done what we need to get done as the leader of the free world. And so, in fact, the USMCA is something that's the first step, but the second step is exactly what Bernie Sanders is saying. Use access to our market as a negotiating thing to make sure not only that we represent American workers, but that we represent the American people in the long run, and we make sure that we get...
I want you guys to realize he did just say empire.
The time.
Yes.
And these
That's
things aren't always exactly how you would do them. But in this case, if you want to criticize Trump for not ever having any friends, and I would agree, he always sides with tyrants over innocents. He always sides with dictators over allies. But I think you've got to have some friends. And those two countries, our neighbors,
I don't know about that.
Perfect, but they are our friends. And we have a president that literally blames everyone in the world, and we have not talked about this enough. He blames Barack Obama for everything that goes wrong. He blames his Federal Reserve chair that he appointed himself. He blames the King of Denmark. Who does that? He blames the Prime Minister of Canada for, he claims, cutting him out of the Canadian version of Home Alone 2. Who does that? that's what Donald Trump does. So my point here is that when we have opportunities to work with our allies, and New Hampshire is such a great example of this. New Hampshire, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire with senators like Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, who believe we need to work with NATO and the rest of the world, who sees it as a smaller state, but a state that is a piece of the world. We cannot be alone. And that trade agreement was not perfect. But the point of it is, if we start isolating ourselves from the rest of the world, we are going to hurt ourselves economically, and we are going to hurt our nation's security.
All right, Senator Klobuchar, thanks very much.
We have hit the 2-hour mark, and then take a quick break and come back with a final question.
All right, that's enough of that nonsense. And we're going to move into some real deal commercials. Coming up, this commercial. Sorry, we're going to start that commercial over. That didn't really work the way I had planned, and I'd like for it to go slightly better than that. So now, for the commercial. Ladies, are you tired of paying to health and beauty products that don't...
I'm a real trapper, don't fuck with these rappers. Y'all niggas just capping, y'all read just actors. Benjamin pull up, update my fashion. Red bottom, my shoe, Cartier, and my glasses. If I don't know you, then nigga, I'm tashing. I fuck around, take a trip to Manhattan. Trying to get mama new whip and then meshing. I need me an action, might call me a phantom.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset, and you change your life.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset, and you change your life.
All right, it looks like we are back. And if you didn't already know, we are here covering the debate. So let's jump into it. Enough of me on the screen. Let's listen to this wonderful debate we have going here. I believe they're in Iowa. Still working on my reporting skills. Until next time. Here we go. See you later.
in 5 American preschoolers are still living below the line, even if they had 10 straight years of economic growth. What does that say to you about where America is today and what we need to do about it?
George, we're in the midst of the most extreme winner-take-all economy in the history of our country. And unfortunately, that extremity is just going to reach unprecedented heights as technology is getting stronger, smarter, more capable all the time. And most of us are not. Most adults feel happy if we stayed about the same on any given day. So if we want to alleviate child poverty, we need to put money directly into the hands of families, particularly single parents. 40% of American children today are born to single moms. 90% of single parents are single moms. And right now, we have fallen into this trap where we have allowed the market to tell us what we are all worth. And what does the market value my wife Evelyn at, or stay-at-home parents around the country? 0. Caregivers taking care of ailing loved ones, like Carl Christensen in Iowa. 0. Volunteers and activists in our communities trying to do something positive. 0. Coaches and mentors helping our kids. 0. Most artists, sorry artists, but it's true. 0. Increasingly local journalists, which is wiping out our ability to have a functioning democracy because you can't vote on something if you actually don't have any news coverage. The mission in this campaign has to be for us to disentangle economic value and human value, say they are not the same things, and make this case to our fellow Americans that we each have intrinsic value as citizens, as human beings, and as owners and shareholders of the richest country in the history of the world.
Mayor Buttigieg.
The problem is America's been counting the wrong things. Now we have a president who says the economy is fantastic because the Dow Jones is looking good. And I'm sure if you've got a building with your name on it close to Wall Street, then that really is the same thing as the economy to you. But the problem is we've had an economy grow and not be able to lift up those most in need, or even so many in the middle. When I'm president, we're going to measure the performance of our economy not by the Dow Jones, but by the income growth of the 90%. Because a good economy is one where children are being lifted out of poverty, just as we focused in South Bend on cutting the poverty rate, in particular the black poverty rate, and making sure families with children were participating in the growth that we did have. But this is one more example of something where the American people want to see change. The American people, not just diehard Democrats, but so many independents and some Republicans think we need to prioritize economic equity, and yet it still doesn't happen. That is why we need to recognize that the time has arrived for a different kind of politics, to turn the page, leave the politics of the past in the past, and deliver a better future before it is too late.
Senator Warren.
So I started my grown-up life as a special education teacher. I learned early on about the worth of women who do this work and raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. We want to have a real future in this country, then invest in our children. Don't leave public education just to our localities and our states. Be a good federal partner. Put real money into our schools. Put real money in housing. Put real money into health care. Put real money into the future of our children. That's how we build the America of our best values.
Mr. Vice President.
I come from a family where a dad walked in one day and said, we got to move, don't have a job. We got to move to a different city. I watched my dad, and I met many people here in this state and others who've gone through the same thing, where the fathers made that longest walk or the mothers made that longest walk. I was listed for the entire time I was in the United States Congress as the poorest man in the United States Congress. My net worth was net zero a couple times. The fact of the matter is that I've never focused on money for me. And I was a single dad for 5 years. It's not as hard as being a single mom, and I had help from my sisters in the audience and others. But the fact is that I think we have to focus on what is at stake here. These aren't someone else's children. They're all our children. They're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions. No, they really are. That lift our national ambitions aloft. We have an overwhelming interest in seeing to it they do well. You know, 24 out of every 100 students in school today, from grade school to high school, are Latino. What are we going to do? Walk away from that? Many of them come from homes that are poor, very poor. That's why I invest so much time and energy in preschool. That's why if I only have $1 to spend, I spend it equipping the child before they get into school in the early days than after. And we talk about all those kids out there that are going to be graduating. A great number of them aren't going to, as Mr. Yang said, aren't going on to college, although I think we should help with college. They're not going on to college. What they're going to do, they're going to be equipped to compete in the 21st century by training them for the new trades, the new opportunities, the new capabilities that are out there. We must focus on our children. Like I said, they're all our children. They're not somebody else's kids. Everyone, as my father would say, is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect, and we're not doing it.
Senator Sanders.
Well, the answer to your question is why we have the highest rate of almost any major country on earth, disproportionately high for the African-American community, by the way, is the same reason that we give massive trillion-dollar tax breaks to the rich and large corporations.
Tell them, Bernie.
Same reason that we give tens of billions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks to the fossil fuel industry, while half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. The same reason that we have 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. The same reason that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. Same reason as to why we are paying, in some cases, 10 times more than other countries for prescription drugs. And that reason is that our priorities are determined by the 1% and by wealthy campaign contributors. Our priorities are determined by those who want to see the rich get richer and are turning their backs on the working families of this country. And what is unique about our campaign is we say unashamedly, we are raising our campaign contributions not from billionaires, but from working class people. That our campaign is about the working families of this country, for the working class of this country. And that is the administration.
Ladies, are you tired of paying too much for health and beauty products that don't really work? Well, don't worry, because Mary Kay and their wonderful consultant Erin Ziegler have all the health and beauty products that you need, and they're affordable. Oh yeah, and they actually work. So, don't miss your opportunity. Go to marykay.com/eziegler. If you're interested in selling your own Mary Kay products, you too can be a consultant. Just contact Erin Ziegler at marykay.com/eziegler. All of the links will be listed in the description below. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks as though we're back live. Let's get back to the debate, as I believe candidates are now giving their closing statements. I could be wrong about that. It might not be the closing statements, but let's tune in anyways.
That when a kid succeeds in Columbia, South Carolina, that is a triumph for every American. And the same is true of a kid in Las Vegas, Nevada. Mr. Trump has no idea what prosperity looks like across this country. It's not just that he does bad things. He doesn't understand that investing in education and healthcare and good union jobs is actually an investment in our common humanity and in growth in the future, mobility, and justice. That is the America that lives in our hearts and minds that will beat Mr. Trump, because he will never be able to imagine it. So in fact, what we need to do is have a new conception, a new dream of America, dream it and make it happen. Imagine the mountain, and then we climb it together. We are in perilous times. I am asking for your vote. Let's rise together.
Candidates, thank you. Thanks for a great debate tonight. Thanks to our audience here at St. Anselm College. Thanks to our partners, WMUR and Apple News. And now I'd like to send it to my colleagues, Martha Radish.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like the debate's over. Those were the closing statements, and they all said what they had to say. My takeaway, Biden looked better than I had seen him. Granted, I haven't paid that much attention. Bernie Sanders sounded like he was saying what he's always said. Sounded like he was consistent. And it sounded like he's got this thing all wrapped up. Big shout out to Elizabeth Warren. I believe she did an excellent job as well. All the candidates, for the most part, well, all that I could see, I think they did well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I've got time for. I've got nobody on the call line. I've got nobody in the comments section. I could wait around all day. I mean, I love to look at how fantastic I look in my new attire. But guess what? Here's the situation, or as some would say, here's the deal. This is Empire debate coverage live here on YouTube. Yes, I know you could have just clicked on the actual debate video, but trust me, there's no way the stuff that they're going to tell you is going to be as exclusive or as wonderful as the stuff that I'm going to tell you. Okay, I'm full of shit. So how about another commercial, huh? Yeah, good idea. Sorry, that wasn't another commercial. Now, for another commercial, let's do it.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset and you change your life.
I'm a real trapper, don't fuck with these rappers. Y'all niggas just capping, y'all read just actors. Benjamin pull up, day my fashion. Red bottom, my shoe, Cartier, and my glasses. If I don't know you, then nigga, I'm tashing. I fuck around, take a trip to Manhattan. Trying to get mama new whip in that mesh. Now need me an action, might call me a phantom.
Sharon Lester Photography. She does maternity pictures, newborn pictures, milestone pictures, and family pictures, all at a great rate with incredible quality. Don't miss your opportunity to book an appointment now. You can find her on Instagram at Sharon Anna, or you can find her on Facebook at Sharon Lester Photography. All of the links will be listed in the description below. Don't miss your chance to book an appointment now. Sharon Lester Photography. Book an appointment. Ladies, are you tired of paying too much for health and beauty products that don't really work? Well, don't worry, because Mary Kay and their wonderful consultant Erin Ziegler have all the health and beauty products that you need, and they're affordable. Oh yeah, and they actually work. Don't miss your opportunity. go to marykay.com/eziegler. If you're interested in selling your own Mary Kay products, you too can be a consultant. Just contact Erin Ziegler at marykay.com/eziegler. All of the links will be listed in the description below.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset and you change your life.
died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset and you change your life.
If I died today, I would be no one.
You can just change your mindset and you change your life.